I was 11, my family lived in Alaska, about 14 miles north of Anchorage. As soon as you leave the actual city of Anchorage, you're in the wilderness pretty quickly. This event happened to me in the summer of 1977. During that time, the town I lived in was actually just a series of roads and off-roads. Most of the people there commuted to Anchorage for work. That's what my parents did. They both worked nights, meaning I spent most of my time alone at home, given that I also don't have any siblings. Our house was about a half-mile away from the nearest paved road and surrounded by woods. I didn't have any real friends that lived close by. I just knew a kid who lived at the end of my road, though. His house was actually the next closest to mine. One afternoon that summer, I was watching TV when there was a knock at our side door. I looked outside and saw it was the kid from the end of the street with someone else. I opened the door and he told me this kid was his cousin, whose family had flown up from wherever they were from to visit. I can't remember the kid's name, but I do remember immediately being nervous around this guy. He had blonde hair down to his shoulders, wore a t-shirt under a thin leather vest. He also had one of those wallets on a chain. This kid's eyes were dark as hell. I was 11 and hadn't even seen evil before, but this kid set off something in my brain. The boy from down the street even seemed nervous being around him. He said he had told his cousin about my BB gun and how cool it was. I told them to wait outside and I could get it. I just knew I didn't want that kid in my house. I got the BB gun and went outside and handed it to the weird kid. He rolled it over his hands and looked up and down without his expression ever changing. Without handing it back, he asked me, "How much do you want for it?" I can't remember my reaction after all these years, but I didn't really need money and the gun was a gift, so I told him it wasn't really for sale, and I remember apologizing for some reason. Unfazed, the kid hands the gun back to me, then reaches behind his back and pulls out the biggest damn knife I had ever seen. I remember thinking for a second that it was a sword. The kid said, "How about a trade then?" I shot the BB gun at cans. What was I going to do with a knife? Hunt a grizzly bear? I declined the offer nervously, and the kid turned away and started walking in the direction of their house. So I went back inside and watched some more TV. About an hour later, there's another knock on the door. I go to our side window where I can see the door. I peek out, and sure enough, it's that kid again. This time, he was alone. The second time he knocked was louder. He called my name. I stayed quiet. He left the door and started walking around our house. My mother had a sunroom where she grew plants. It had large windows all along the wall. I saw him go to those windows, press his face against the glass, trying to see deep into the house. I stayed out of sight. Luckily, there were no lights on, and I had turned off the TV when I heard the knock. When he couldn't see anything, he continued around the house. He took out that huge knife and began tapping the butt of the handle along the outer wall as he circled. Then he started saying, "I know you're in there." My heart started racing. Of course, he knew I was in the house. I was 11, home alone. How could I have left the house? Hop in a car and take off? Hell, both our cars were gone anyway. I continued keeping low and quiet, hoping he might think I went to a friend's house somewhere else. How long could this psycho just circle the house? He was maybe 14. He'd get bored pretty quickly. No such luck. This kept up for about an hour, the tapping and his voice telling me to come out and that he had another trade for my gun. Screw that. I'd already gone all in on the "I'm not home" tactic, so I stayed quiet and made my way to the kitchen where our one telephone was. This was 1977. No cell phones, and our phone was attached to a wall in the kitchen. Luckily, it had a super long handset cord. I got it, stayed low to the floor, and called my mother at work. She took me seriously, but there was no way she could get home. My dad was in the Air Force, and they sure wouldn't let him skip out early to handle his son's crisis. I would have to ride it out. The sun had gone down, and by that, I mean it was barely peeking above the horizon. In the summer, the sun never completely went down in our area. The kid kept pacing around for another 30 minutes or so, and then was suddenly gone. Not being an idiot in a horror movie, I just stayed down and quiet. Eventually, my parents got home. I was still awake. They brushed it off because I ended up being fine. But I never hung out with the kid down the street again, and I pretty much stayed inside the remainder of the summer. There was something wrong with that kid. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe he would have done something absolutely brutal to me, just for that damn BB gun. For the record, my wife and I are pretty normal folks. We don't do drugs, we're social drinkers, but let's just say we don't have a lot of friends, except other couples with children, so basically we don't drink that much. All that to say that when this event took place, we were absolutely lucid and not under the influence. I'm 200% sure of what I saw. My only regret is that I didn't record it or took pictures as evidence. It was summer 2013. My wife was 5 months pregnant, so we decided to look for a nice house to rent in the countryside. We browsed a well-known website and found a small villa near a vineyard. The owner called us very quickly. We will call him Gerald. Gerald was a fellow in his late 50s. His picture on the website displayed a posh guy wearing small glasses. He was really caring and nice. After a little research on the internet, this guy was running an art gallery. He told us he wouldn't be there to give us the key, but a colleague would welcome us. The day we arrived, a Slavic woman in her 40s was there. She gave us the keys, jumped in her black sports car, and left. It took 5 minutes. The house was beautiful. We were so excited to have so much room just for us. 15 minutes after the check-in, we were having a drink by the swimming pool. Something felt weird about the house though. It had clearly been furnished by a home staging designer, as everything was perfect and new. Somehow, the frames had generic pictures inside, like stock pictures. The poses seemed too unnatural, and you couldn't recognize one person from a picture to another. My wife decided to store our empty luggage on the top of a big cupboard, but she clumsily hit a little box and made it fall on the floor. It contained 2 pencils and a keychain with 2 small keys. We put it back where it fell from and started to feel hungry, so we went to cook dinner. The weather was lovely. On that very night, we stayed on the roof and watched the sunset. Then my wife felt exhausted and went to bed. I was reading on the roof when my eyes got stuck on a small staircase behind the pool house. I tried not to pay attention, but ended up heading for that staircase. The stair led to a little cellar. It was a dusty and smelly corridor with a solid oak door at the end. That door was closed by 2 padlocks. I realized I wasn't minding my own business, so I went back upstairs. 1 hour later, I was still thinking about that door and what was behind it. I suddenly remembered the keychain with the 2 small keys. Now it was obvious. I couldn't help going back there to try the keys. Once in front of that door, it was now sure that the key would match. The padlock gave in 2 seconds. When I opened the door, a strong smell hit me, like mold mixed with chemicals. It was clear I just entered a photo lab. On a shelf, hundreds of pictures going from nudes to hardcore pornography. On 5 of them, I positively recognized Gerald with a black woman. She was attached to a rope by the wrists. Utterly shocked, I found 2 plastic boxes with photographs of teen pornography. By the writings on the pictures, it went from 2004 to present days. Near the red room, I found more pictures of very violent bondages scenes. The woman had bruises and cuts. There also was an old camera and a dozen tapes, but my heart was already on the brink of explosion, so I didn't watch any of these. I closed the door and sat by the pool for 45 minutes. I needed to put all back together and decide what to do. I showed the pictures to my wife, and we left the house the very night. We called the cops on our way home, and they told us they'd keep us informed. They never did. 1 week later, I had a message on my phone. It was Gerald. He apologized to us, stating everything I saw was staged. He insisted he worked for magazines and sometimes they ordered shocking pictures. I never believed an inch of what he said. Neither did my wife. I called him back to tell him he had to refund us, as the website asked him to do, but he never answered. I called him again 3 weeks later to ask him to refund, but I reached a grocery store instead. There was absolutely no more trace of that guy on the internet. To this day, we don't know for sure. Still, every now and then we bring it up knowing we'll never have an answer.